despite these signs for optimism, there are major challenges at the global level. And I see these particularly in two ways. First, developing countries are doubly disadvantaged in that they have contributed least to historic patterns of environmental degradation, and yet they carry a disproportionate burden of environmental ills. Of course, it's widely acknowledged that those at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder have the most difficult time in terms of dealing with environmental protection and actually getting fundamental access to environmental resources. Problems of inequity are most starkly revealed in relation to the distribution of climate impacts. Those who are most harmed by climate change are usually those who have contributed least to it. They are usually also those who have the least capacity in order to adapt. I'll talk a little bit more about adaptation. I think it's a fundamental problem at the global level that way too much attention has been given to mitigation and not enough to adaptation. Secondly, developing countries are faced with the difficult conundrum of what I refer to as a constrained development opportunity. What I mean by this is that concern with the limits to growth is again resurfacing at a time when the densely populated states of China, Brazil, and Indonesia are on the economic rise. In 1928, Mahatma Gandhi famously remarked, "God forbid that India should ever take to industrialization after the manner of the West. If an entire nation of 300 million took to similar economic exploitation, it would strip the world bare like locusts." Protracted debates over biophysical constraints on economic growth have tended to surface over the years at times of crisis, obviously during the temporary oil shocks of the 70s and 80s, and more recently with the cost of oil going up to over 100 a barrel. Originally, the limits of growth thesis was highly criticized because it didn't take into account the prospects for endogenous change, particularly through technological innovation, new policy ideas, and social advocacy as well. But times have changed, and with the industrializing states of China and India now making up a third of the world's population, around about 2.5 billion, Gandhi's cautionary words can no longer be ignored. The dilemma for developing states, particularly those with large populations, is that the resource abundance enjoyed by the early industrializations is no longer possible. And not only that, but the consumption patterns that emulate the United States can no longer be sustained because that would obviously overwhelm the supporting natural systems. So sustainable development is no longer something just to be talked about at academic conferences like this one, as critically important as it is, but it is of course now fundamental to human progress and to the future of the world in general. Having spent a lot of time in the world's most populous nation where environmental problems are literally verging on the catastrophe, I am very much committed to the idea of sustainable development. I also think that China holds the prospects for becoming a role model for the rest of the developing world, not only in terms of making adjustments to its own development practices, but also to its increasing investment activities overseas, especially on the African continent. The task of implementing sustainable development on a grand scale, of course, is extraordinarily difficult. Efforts have to be based on a very deep understanding of development needs, of institutions, of cultures, and traditions. The challenges are multiple, and it's not my intention to cover them comprehensively here. Instead, I'd like to focus on 4 critical challenges based on empirical observations. The first is that although attitudes are changing as described above, in actual practice a 19th century approach towards development still prevails. In the global south, as in the history of the West, the dominant idea of human progress is still manifest in a desire for greater material wealth that's intimately connected with the development of the modern nation state. In the Chinese context, the philosopher Wang Hui has argued that the discourse on modernity has a strong tendency in China to overlook the inequities and social injustices that occur as a transition from the old to the new. There is a sense, if you like, of embedded fatalism, which is being replicated as much in China as it is elsewhere. Highly symbolic in this regard, I think, is the continuing reliance on large-scale dams that pay inadequate attention to the human and social and cultural costs. It's not dam building per se that is the problem. Of course, in many developing countries, energy infrastructure needs are vast, and clearly hydropower does offer a cleaner alternative to dirty coal. But the problem is when of scale, and when these dams are being built, and they are being built at an enormous pace in the part of the world where I have been working, without any appreciation of the natural benefits that free-flowing rivers provide. A second major challenge for achieving a high level of sustainability relates to the fact that the poor regions are often the most ecologically fragile. For example, I think this audience will be very aware that the water-stressed regions of the world are all based in the south, and critical problems of sanitation and access to clean water affect billions of people. And the situation is made worse by the relocation of highly polluting industries, often from urban areas into rural areas, and it's those living in areas with low levels of education that are the most vulnerable. Third, it's becoming increasingly clear that uneven development is leading to a situation in which the richer regions, whether they're in developing countries or industrialized countries, are in a position where they can more easily adapt, because there is a correlation between adaptation and capacity. One thinks of it more broadly as institutional, social, or technological. So one of the risks here is that sustainability could quite easily simply become a preserve of the rich.